Well, good morning, folks. I'm showing right at the top of the hour at 9 o'clock. So glad you could be here to be with us today. We're going to be covering Enlist best management practices and also some of the common questions that we as Enlist field specialists get throughout the season. So we got a lot of good information here to share with you today. So hope you enjoy it. So today's presenters, my name is Brett Gordon. I'm an Enlist field specialist for the Mid-South states. So I cover the Boot Hill, Missouri, West Tennessee, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and then I have about the east half of Texas also. And joining me today is Andy Carragher. He's a Enlist field specialist for the remainder of Missouri minus the Boot Hill, Missouri, and about the eastern 2/3 of Kansas. So just going over an agenda, kind of what you can expect out of this webinar today. We're going to go over the 2023 Enlist weed control system season recap, kind of hit some highlights of what happened last year. Then we're going to give some Enlist application updates, and then we're going to jump into some general questions around that Enlist field specialists are asked. So I just want to point your attention to make sure, if you have a question that maybe we didn't address or didn't cover clearly, make sure you type that question into the Zoom feature, the question feature in the Zoom app. We're going to stop twice to address these questions halfway through and at the end of the session. So we hope to answer all the questions you might have. So just a 2023 season recap. The Enlist weed control system, the growth continues to accelerate. Since 2017, we've sprayed more than 140 million acres of Enlist, and we're on the 6th consecutive year of market share gains. As of last year, we're Enlist E3 soybeans is the #1 soybean technology in the U.S. We're just at over 55% of the market there, and greater than an 80% spray rate of Enlist herbicides on Enlist crops last year during 2023. So that tells me that customers are really liking the Enlist herbicide system and it's doing a good job for them. One thing I want to point out, our Enlist system is a clear contrast from the countryside of dicamba characteristics versus our 2,4-D choline characteristics. Just a lot of differences in volatility where we don't have a volatility issue. And when you spray it, it's neighbor friendly and it stays where it's supposed to. Last thing I want to point out here is we do have a reliable supply of Enlist 1 and Enlist Duo herbicides. We're a U.S. company and the stuff's made here in the USA. So a little bit about our role as Enlist field specialists. We strive for educational excellence. That's the one cool thing about I think that's cool about Corteva is we really stand behind and provide a lot of education and stewardship outreach around the Enlist system. Last year, we educated over 27,000 growers, applicators, and retailers. We did it through a variety of methods, whether it be online, in-field trainings, classroom, field plot tours, all those types of things. So, we're spending a lot of time, we're reaching a lot of people and making sure that we're, dedicated to stewardship and making sure that you're using the system correctly and having good success with it. So, just talking about growing for the future, in 2024, we're going to be building on E3 soybean acres. Last year we were over 55%, and we're quickly headed towards 65% of the market share. And that's just a testament to how well the system works. We're working as a hard push towards 2025 portfolio goals of conversion to Enlist E3. We're relaunch Enlist corn in 2023, and that's going to be a new market on the horizon for Enlist herbicides. And I know there's a lot of excitement around Enlist corn and what it brings to the table as far as extra tools in the toolbox and more options for a successful weed control program. We have over 120 Enlist E3 seed licensees and multi-channel seed brands to add to this herbicide opportunity. And we also have a new Southern strategy to accelerate E3 soybean conversion and reinvigorate Enlist cotton business in the South. So now we're going to talk about the just a weed control system application update. And you can see here's our 3 traded crops that have an Enlist technology. We have Enlist E3 soybeans, Enlist corn that's coming online now, and then we also have Enlist cotton. And you'll see across these 3 crops, all 3 of them have herbicide tolerance to 2,4-D choline, glyphosate, and glufosinate. The one neat thing about Enlist corn is we also have a 4th herbicide tolerance with the FOP herbicide. So that's going to allow you to apply a Sure 2 herbicide over the top in crop and give you some extra control. I know many folks might be dealing with glyphosate resistant grasses out there. So that just gives us another really great tool to add into our toolbox with Enlist corn. Andy, do you have anything to add around Enlist corn as far as, I know a lot in the Midwest, a lot of clethodim goes out. Do you have anything you want to add there?
Yeah, so on Enlist corn, there a couple things come to mind, and we'll cover this in a little more detail. But a couple things when using it 2,4-D on corn, you say, well, why would you want to do that? Or we've got some of those questions addressed. But one thing is we've got the opportunity to bring in a new grass control compound post-emerge on corn. And you say, well, Roundup works pretty good, but not always. So there's starting to be some tolerant grasses and to glyphosate, depending on where you're at. I know in parts of Missouri, we have tolerant Johnson grass. We're looking at some difficulties controlling barnyard grass and possibly some panicums in some areas, and certainly ryegrass in certain parts of the country. So we bring an additional grass control option. And if you think about those FOP herbicides, most of them are all past their patent dates, and so they're pretty inexpensive. Okay, so it's something that's not a new herbicide cost. It's going to be a fairly inexpensive venture to do for FOP, and it also helps you manage your corn on situations much more cleanly, and gives you some options on even on beans. We come in and we can tank mix with clethodim on over the top of beans and do a real good job on some of that stuff. So that's kind of where I see it fitting up in the parts of the Midwest.
Very good. So just going into Enlist 1, Enlist Duo herbicides. Enlist Duo is going to be our convenient proprietary blend of 2,4-D choline and glyphosate. So what that brings to the table is just going to give you multiple sites of action tank mixed into that jug. If you're dealing with fields that have a lot of grass control that's going to be needed, that's going to be a great fit for Enlist Duo, and it's going to work really well in burn down situations as well. The good thing about this is, this pre-mix is going to improve tank stability, and it's going to be a blend that's going to stay mixed when you put it in the sprayer. Moving on to Enlist 1, that's just going to be our straight goods 2,4-D choline with additional tank mix flexibility. What that's going to bring to the table is it's going to allow you to mix with glyphosate or a Liberty herbicide, whereas other weed control systems on the market that are prevalent today, you can't do that. So that's going to give you a lot of flexibility. It's going to give you more approved tank mix partners, whether it be residual herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, and others as well. And just for you to know, you can go and find more resources about tank mix partners at enlisttankmix.com. It's going to give you a really comprehensive list of things that have been tested to make sure that we're not increasing volatility of our products when you tank mix these products with Enlist 1. So I'd encourage you to check out enlisttankmix.com. And in summary, it's just going to give you more flexibility to customize what you need on your particular acre. We all know that there's a lot of different situations that come up on our farms, so it's just going to give you a lot of flexibility. Either way, it's going to give you a lot of good control of tough to control herbicide resistant broadleaf weeds. And you can see a comprehensive list there of a lot of weeds that we do a good job controlling. So moving into some general best management practices around the Enlist weed control system. We want to make sure that we're targeting broadleaf weeds when they're small. If you can, ideally, if you can be in that 2 to 3 inch weed size range, that's going to be key. And then we're going to have a max height label of 6 inches. Anything above that's going to be considered off label. So it's really important to spray when weeds are actively growing. We'll talk about a little later the effects that drought has on herbicide efficacy. So it's really important, since this is an auxin herbicide, we want to make sure those weeds are actively growing. Very important. Apply full rates. That's going to be key in managing resistant, hard to control weeds. And it's also good stewardship to make sure that we don't we keep this a good working tool for a long time. We'll talk about qualified nozzles, but make sure we do have a good list of qualified nozzles, lots of options to choose from. But you want to make sure that you're choosing a qualified nozzle that's on label and also gives you good coverage, especially if you're using contact products like Liberty tank mix with Enlist-1. Stay on that upper end of the approved label pressures for those nozzles that you choose. That's just going to help us out with coverage. So that's a good practice to always keep in mind. We want to be in that 15 to 20 gallons per acre water carrier volume. And especially if you're adding Liberty into the mix, you definitely want to be on that 20 gallon, the high end of that range there. Spray additives, we got crop oil, MSO, and AMS. Make sure you're using the appropriate one. We're covering. I know there's people on here from wide geographies across the U.S. today, so make sure you're reaching out to your local crop protection Corteva rep to make sure we're adding the right additives to our spray mixture. So I mentioned weed height earlier. That has a big impact on weed control efficacy. You look here at Enlist-1 herbicide weed control height evaluation. We have 3 different weed species. You can see that if we're in that 2 to 4 inch range, we're getting the best control. And as you get taller and taller weeds, you're going to see control slip right there. So controlling small actively growing weeds is always going to result in more consistent weed control than larger ones. And this slide just further illustrates that point. You can see we have various weeds at different sizes right here, and those red circles indicate a growing point that's on that weed. And you can see at 2 inches we have 9 growing points, but as we gather in size, we get up to a 4 to 6 inch weed. We're dealing with twice as many growing points as we were with that 2 inch weed. So what that results in is it's just going to be it's putting a lot more pressure on that herbicide to do a good job and successfully control that weed. And then you look at that picture on the far right hand side. We're dealing with a weed. You don't have enough fingers to count all those growing points. So that's just how critically important it is to make sure we're targeting small, actively growing weeds. So mentioned that we want to target actively growing weeds. We experienced a lot of drought conditions last year, and so this is a study that was done at the University of Illinois, and they were looking at the effects of moisture or stress level on water hemp and how well that plays into the herbicide efficacy. And you can see on the top table there, we have the treatments were 2,4-D and glyphosate, and you notice they're at reduced rates. The reason they reduced those rates is they wanted to determine the effect of drought stress on weed control without completely controlling all the treatments out there. So is they use reduced rates just so they could tease out the effect that drought has on these treatments. So you can see under a no stress situation, that means these plants had plenty of water. We're getting, you know, mid 80% control. And then you can see that when an application was made, when the drought was taking place before the application was made, meaning that plant was stressed during the time of application, we're really losing a lot of slippage there. You're seeing conditions afterwards. We did see some control, but not nearly as much. So, you know, with a systemic product, with a growth regulator product like 2,4-D, we want to make sure that we're, you know, if there's any way you can wait on a rainfall event to make sure we're having some, you know, a stress-free weed situation where we can make that application, and we're going to have a lot better control situations in that scenario. This slide just is going to illustrate using full rates to make sure we're having optimal weed control. You can see across the top there, we have a variety of different weed species and also some glyphosate-resistant weed species right there. And you can see on the left-hand side, we have Enlist-1. We have a half rate of 16 ounces and then the full rate of 32 ounces. And you can see at that 16 ounces per acre rate of Enlist-1, we're not doing a good job controlling some of these weeds, especially some of these troublesome weeds like glyphosate-resistant palmer amaranth. When we bump that up, we're getting a lot better control. And then on top of that, when we're tank mixing with another product, getting multiple modes of action out there, you can see we're doing a much better job controlling many of these problematic weeds. Okay, moving into nozzle selection. You can find it might be difficult to see this up clearly. We have this information on our website, enlist.com. So you can find this information, browse through these different nozzles and find out what works best for you. You'll notice on the nozzles that are highlighted in green, those are the nozzles that are going to provide the best balance of coverage and drift control combined. The yellow ones, they are labeled for use, but they're going to provide, you know, a little larger droplet and additional drift control as a result of that. And we also have setups for pulse width modulation. And the last thing I'll mention is we want to make sure you use the upper end of qualified pressure range to make sure we're having better coverage in this situation. This slide just further illustrates, you know, talking about droplet size versus coverage. You see 3 leaves here. The one on the left just has one drop on it, versus the one on the far right has 64 droplets. What's interesting is in each one of those leaves is the same amount of the spray volume applied to each one of these leaves. So that just shows you, you know, what droplet size range you're in can have a really big impact on how much coverage, how much leaf coverage you're actually going to get out of that nozzle. So it's very important. We kind of want to balance this scenario where we're getting some larger droplets to avoid drift, but also we want to be in that happy medium where we're getting plenty of coverage in that situation. You can see these are just some slides of some water sensitive paper, and this just kind of showed you the interaction of you know, our water carrier volume and our nozzle selection. The top two slides there are showing 10 gallons per acre of water, and then the bottom 2 are showing 20 gallons per acre. On the left-hand side, we have AIXR nozzle, which is going to produce a coarse nozzle. And on the right-hand side, we have a TTI, which is producing ultra coarse droplets. And you can see that, you know, if we can be in that AIXR situation and we bump our gallons per acre up, it can have a huge impact on how much coverage we have with that spray setup. So you're going to get a lot better weed control options whenever you stick to that higher GPA and you go with more of a coarse nozzle versus ultra coarse. Looking at deposition aids with Enlist herbicide. First off, I want to point your attention to the slide that has just Enlist alone, does not have a deposition aid added to it. You'll notice that picture is zoomed in 1,500 times, whereas the other pictures they're only zoomed in 650x or 850x. So that's just showing you alone that we're not getting a lot of spreading across that leaf surface, whereas you add a product like COC or MSO, we're getting a lot more leaf spread on that leaf surface, and it's also doing a better job at penetrating that leaf cuticle as well. And what that's going to, the end result of that is it's going to give you better herbicide activity. So just looking at our program approach to E3 Enlist soybeans, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. I just want to hit some high points. And those high points is we recommend that you make sure you're doing some type of tillage or start clean with a burn down. And then when you plant, we want to make sure that you're using a good soil residual herbicide. And that's going to be key. We're never going to tell you not to use a residual. That's just good stewardship of weed control. And then for Enlist and Enlist One and Enlist Duo, our timing on that is applied through the R1 growth stage. And again, we recommend you tank mix with either a glyphosate or glufosinate, Liberty herbicide. And so that's just going to give you more multiple modes of action going on to that acre, and that's going to prolong the effectiveness of all these products. Moving into Enlist corn, again, starting with tillage or clean burn down. You can see we have a full list of residual pre-herbicides there. And we recommend you tank mix with a post soil residual herbicide. You can see we have a lot of options, good options there. I know here we're really excited about Cairo coming on here in my area. And then you can see we can apply Enlist herbicides, no larger than a V8 growth stage or 30 inches. If you get into a situation where you can't get there in time, you can use drop nozzles with Enlist herbicide from a 30-inch to a 48-inch high crop. Again, you can, apply with an approved state herbicide, and that cutoff's at 30 inches there, and then up to 24 inches on a Liberty, if you choose to use that. And you can see there with the FOP herbicide, the only FOP herbicide we currently have labeled for in-crop use on Enlist corn is going to be Assure 2, and you can apply that from the V2 to the V6 growth stage. So I kind of went over these timings already on Enlist corn, but you can see, the key takeaway here is Enlist One and Enlist Duo is going to have a same application timing as glyphosate. And then Liberty, emergence through V6, and Assure 2, V2 to V6. Again, this is going to give you the greatest post herbicide flexibility on the marketplace when you're planting Enlist corn. It's just going to give you a lot more flexibility. You can customize your tank mixes to fit what works best on your farm. And Enlist corn is going to offer the most versatility for managing herbicide-resistant weeds. Again, it's just more tools in the toolbox, being able to tank mix multiple modes of action, and providing good stewardship and fighting herbicide resistance. Andy, is there anything else you want to add here?
No, I think the thing of it is this has the opportunity, and we'll talk in more specifics here in just a second, but I think that it opens up a lot of new options in corn. Okay, it's not like it's going to be the primary herbicide to be used in corn, because there's a lot of good corn herbicides, to be honest with you, but it gives you a new option. It allows you to control some tough to control weeds late in the season on corn by putting in Enlist and maybe even Liberty. Okay. And then it also gives you some options to control corn in corn with a FOPS, which is a nice option to do. But we can talk mostly timing and safety. You know, there's a lot of dicamba used in corn, and so if you have Enlist beans and you don't want to use dicamba, this gives you an option to come back in and safely use a good post-emergent broadleaf herbicide next to your Enlist beans.
The one other thing I wanted to mention was just I know in the Midwest, a lot of dicamba gets used in corn, and this is just going to be a more neighbor-friendly option if you choose to use Enlist.
Yeah.
Okay, we're up to Q&A. It looks like we do have a couple of questions here. The first one is, you recommend 2 to 3 inch weeds, but up to 6 inches. Are some weed species more forgiving at 6 inches than others? I will say with tough to control weeds like Palmer amaranth, things like that, you need to be at that 2 to 3 inch range, or even smaller if you can, because once it gets up to 6 inches, it especially here in the Mid-South, it becomes very difficult to control. The other thing you got to think about is we got to be very timely, because in the summertime, you know, weeds like Palmer, they can grow, you know, at a rapid pace, an inch or more a day. So we got to be real timely on those things. Andy, is anything you want to add to that question?
No, the thing of it is that if you're dealing with Palmer, which is really a water hemp on steroids, that you really need to get it early. But water hemp, for the most of you up in the Midwest and up, water hemp's a big problem. But again, you can get an inch growth a day on water hemp species. The problem is, if you're scouting from your road, you're not going to see a 3-inch weed, and you'll see them at 6 though, or 9. And by the time you saw all those growing points, and it's so difficult to get coverage on, you might get 8 out of 10 growing points covered, but guess what? That's where it blows out, and you don't quite kill your weed. So that's the whole idea, is to get it on as early as possible, and before 6 inches. And some weeds are more forgiving. Yeah, you can probably kill a velvet leaf a little easier later, stuff like that. But boy, if you're dealing with anything in the amaranth or pigweed family, you better get it on quickly. And so we got another question here. We're going to cover adjuvants here next in this Enlist Liberty COC. We're going to cover that, so I won't answer that right now, because we're just getting ready to jump into the adjuvant section. So hopefully I can give you an answer about that tank mix. So I'm gonna request control here and see if I can make this work.
Okay. Should be good to go, Andy.
Okay. For those, that you on the phone here, Andy Carriger, he introduced me. I've been around a long time. I was on the Dow side forever, and then I worked with the Enlist piece and 2,4-D and all of our basic chemistry for a long time. I live in the Kansas City area, and so I'm going to try to cover most of. And if there's anything in the South, I'm going to ask Brett to try to chime in on some of the Southern specifics. But for the upper Midwest, I think we'll try to deal with those questions and comments as we go forward here. So not want me to advance. There we go. Okay, the first question, should I use AMS, spray additives, and at what rates with Enlist herbicide? And that was a question that came in on our board there. And so so a lot of this depends on where you're at, okay? And it's different in Michigan than it is in Missouri as it is in Mississippi, okay? And so the need for AMS a lot of times depends on your pH and or your hardness of your water. And in some areas that have a lot of calcium and magnesium or manganese in their water, which we do, and I live in Missouri, and so we do there, and AMS really helps to buffer that water situation down a little bit as a buffering agent. And if you think about the post-emergent spray that we've all done over the last few years since Roundup crops were introduced. And so what did they always recommend to make glyphosate work better? Back in the old Monsanto days, they always recommended good coverage, which is the opposite of a TTI, okay? Good coverage, and always use AMS. And AMS will help your glyphosate work as well, especially on some grasses. And so the rates with Enlist are a lot dependent on where you're at. Let me see, it's not really wanting to advance here. Yeah, we're having a technical issue here. Not wanting to advance. Let me see here. All right, I'm going to have you see if you can advance it, Brent. Can you forward it?
Try it now.
No. Zach, are you still on the line? There we go. I'm not sure if that was you or me. Should I use AMS additives with Enlist herbicides? So the answer is, if you're fighting any type of pigweed species that's difficult to control anyway, and you have some grass control that you're wanting to accomplish at the same time, I think it's a good a really good practice to go with AMS. Okay. It helps not only in the uptake of the herbicide, but it helps to buffer that solution and can counteract some of those charged materials in the water, especially hard water. And it can help glyphosate uptake in velvet leaf. And I'm going to say it also helps on some grass species, especially hairy leafed ones like crabgrass and stuff. And typical use rate is, 8 to 15, 16, 17 pounds if you're using the dry material. So many things are used now that are blends and or liquid concentrates. And so it's going to be hard to tell you which one to use. But as long as you use a blend that's approved, we have a lot of MSO or COC and AMS blends. And as long as you're getting on sufficient amounts of both products, then I think those blends are just fine to use and they're approved as we move forward here. Go ahead, next slide. Okay. So should I use AMS additives with Enlist herbicides? And so the wetting agents or surfactants, emulsifiers, and what I'm going to call the spreading agents, NIS. That's basically all that does is spread that out on the leaf surface. It reduces the surface tension. Those are okay to use, but I prefer, in addition to those, especially if you're in hot conditions, drier conditions, you need something as a penetrating agent as well. And so whether that's a crop oil concentrate or a methylated seed oil, getting it in the leaf surface, you saw that slide that Brett showed about those oils tend to set on the leaf surface and burn themselves into the leaf, not only on the plant, but on the weed as well. And so the uptake, I think, is better on some of these MSOs. I know in the case of water hemp, and regardless if you're in Iowa or Missouri or Illinois, this whole area, we tend to have an opinion that always use either a crop oil concentrate or MSO at a full rate. Maybe put up with a little bit of cosmetic speckling, but you only get one chance at weed control, especially when your first post-emergent spray is critical, especially if you have water hemp. And I think it's always be prepared to go overboard if in other words, go to the max of the oils, put up with a little speckling and get better weed control. Because if you don't, if you scrimp on some of those additives and it's dry, that weed's really hard to kill a second time. And so we always recommend adding MSO or COC at the upper end of the rate range. Some of these new highly concentrated ones are typically double X, and so those rates are half. So I can't get into rates on a specific product, but use the recommended rate toward the high end of the range. Okay. All right, this just shows you kind of the burning, the MSO and the COC in the bottom segment there shows you that it tends to burn itself into the leaf and thereby getting better uptake of the herbicide. Okay. So what is the difference between 2,4-D choline and other 2,4-D formulations? All right. So I was involved in this from the onset. Okay. So if you think about, if you go home and Google choline, that's what I want everybody to do go home and Google choline solvent, and that'll give you an answer on why it's so different. Because the first thing that comes up is pharmaceutical uses. And choline solvents are the basis for a lot of things like that need a lot of active ingredients suspended in them because it has such a good binding ability. So one of them is cough syrup, okay? All types of medications have a choline base to them. And so the old Dow Chemical Company that I used to work for, if we could have made 2,4-D amine or 2,4-D ester work, we would have done that. It works, but it does not work safely in crop. And so the choline part of it was designed specifically for in crop use. And so it won't get up and move, and that's a real thing. And so you're saying, oh well, 2,4-D is really cheap now. Yeah, it is really cheap. There's a reason we pay a premium for Enlist herbicide. Is because of the way it was developed and made, and the material that's in it. There's a big difference between 2,4-D choline and 2,4-D amine. And so you can see on this chart that the choline salt is more stable. It stays associated on the leaf surface, where even the amine and certainly the ester releases and leaving some of that acid available to vaporize and leave. And so it's inherently less volatile, 96% reduction versus the ester, and 88% versus the amine. So it is a completely different product, and that's the reason that its price is substantially different than straight 2,4-D. And so those of you who have sprayed a lot of it knows it even has a different odor, and different mixability. So I think moving forward, there is a big difference, but I wanted to stress that because we developed that specifically for in-crop use with a whole different solvent system. Next slide. So less physical drift. The product comes, I hate to say complete because there's a lot of things that add to it, but as far as the Colex-D technology, anti-drift, anti-volatility is in the jug. Okay. It has 90% less drift than traditional 2,4-D formulations in the can. Okay. You can tell I'm old. It's in the jug or the can. So it has we went through years of tank mix partner approvals with a lot of you probably on the phone. Okay. So we went through approval process. If it affected the drift or volatility, we didn't approve it. So that approval list of, how big is that now, Brett? 1,000? 12?
Yeah, it's over 1,000, I think.
Yeah, 1,000, 1,100 products that are approved. And we have near zero volatility. Matter of fact, it's not going to cover up any skips. Okay. So if you're an applicator and you worry about leaving a skip or on the end, you might ought to hang a little closer to the last spray because it's not going to volatilize and kill any weeds in a small area. So that tells you that it stays exactly where you need to have it. And I'm going to say the low odor. It has a lower odor compared to other traditional 2,4-D formulations. It's not completely without odor, but it's a completely different smell. And those of you that sprayed it know that. One key thing is Enlist is the first product to have gone through this new evaluation product through EPA's enhanced endangered species assessment. Okay. And I'm telling you, that was not easy to get through. And so the Enlist products received approval through this new assessment. And a lot of products, including glyphosate, dicamba, all these are going through that right now, or will be in the next few years. Non-Enlist 2,4-D is not going to have the same assessment. It may pose threats to endangered species or those type of things, and that is why it's not approved. And so there's a lot. This is a whole new set of rules and regulations that is much more stringent and difficult to pass. And so traditional 2,4-Ds will not pass that as far as this assessment on Endangered Species Act. So Enlist has gone through it. It was not easy, but we went through it and we passed just fine. Next slide. Okay, what differentiates Enlist 1 versus other 2,4-D formulations? We talked about the formulation, the solvent system. One key thing about it is the money we put into traits and resources and herbicides here at Corteva. We're averaging about $4 million daily that we put into research and development into Enlist traits and Enlist herbicides. And you say, okay, well, so what? The reason that we're able to have a very safe herbicide to use and effective is because we put that type of money and investment into the trait as well. And we would not have a viable registration had we not put this kind of money into what I call a super safe 2,4-D formulation. And no other 2,4-D formulations are authorized to be used. I've had a lot of people say, well, I'm going to spray it with 2,4-D amine, or I'm going to finish up, I'm out. And I said, okay, no, you can't do that. And so not only do you break your technology use agreement, but we also have a stewardship agreement that you'll soon see that where we will have the ability to come in and question some of these applications and look at the records and that type of thing. I don't know how heavy-handed we're going to be, but I'm telling you, we're going to know where these applications go on, and you run the risk of losing the ability to use Enlist if you try to squeeze a couple bucks an acre out of a cheaper 2,4-D formulation. It's just not worth it. Okay, next slide. Why bring Enlist herbicide tolerance to corn, and won't that promote resistance? And that's a question we always get at these. You know, why do we need to have Enlist herbicide tolerance on corn? Matter of fact, I can use 2,4-D on corn right now legally, right? A lot of us have squeezed that in the past early on corn. Now, what does the herbicide tolerance bring to corn? Okay. Now, the first thing is it just like he talked about before, more tools in the toolbox. So we don't expect that Enlist herbicide is going to be used on every acre of corn. Although every bag of corn that we sell, whether it's Pioneer or whether it's Brevant or any of our licensees or channels, it will have the ability to have Enlist herbicide used on it. Now, we'll have four different modes of action: 2,4-D choline, FOP, we talked about that, glufosinate, glyphosate, more tools to come back in at different timings, and gives you some options, especially in those areas where you have Enlist beans or other sensitive crops and you don't want to use dicamba in your corn. This gives you that option to come back in safely and use a good post-emergent broadleaf product. It gives you peace of mind. You know, probably 1 in 5 acres receives some type of dicamba annually. Matter of fact, a lot of that dicamba that was put on corn in the Midwest, if you remember that scenario a couple, 3 years ago where we had some cupped Enlist beans, some of that was coming out of corn, not necessarily all out of beans. And so you don't need to worry about crop injury, twisting, or brittleness. Matter of fact, this does away with the auxin-induced brittleness when it comes to, so it will take that away. You can use this product later, clear up to 30 inches or so, and without the worry of brittleness from auxin. And it's real pretty neighbor friendly when it talks about not being able to move out of corn and other susceptible crops. So you got a product you can use in corn right next to your beans, basically zero volatility. And if you'll just do a few things like nozzles and pressures and application, you're going to find out that this has a much friendlier option than come back in with dicamba, especially next to dicamba sensitive beans. Next slide. So won't Enlist corn create weed resistance? Well, so the trait tolerance does not cause resistance. The proper herbicide management leads to herbicide resistance. So if you think back, if some of you are old enough to remember when we had in the glyphosate tolerant corn and crops come on board, okay, So everything was straight glyphosate, AMS, flat fan nozzles, go to town, right? It worked extremely well. What was one of the problems is that why did we get so much resistance to glyphosate from a weed perspective? It's because we relied on one mode of action. Everything that we preach about in the Enlist herbicide program is the program. It's using multiple modes of action. Whether you use our pre-plant or somebody else's, we do not care. The thing of it is use a pre-plant, use a different modes of action, not only with corn, but with beans, and use multiple modes of action post with residuals. There's a lot of inexpensive overlay residuals, metolachlor, all those that work really well with the Enlist system, and you can tank mix those so it doesn't require another pass. And so we're going to have the ability to come in corn with a lot of tank mix partners, and those aren't all identified yet, but certainly with things like atrazine and all those, we'll be able to come back in and get on some of those, get multiple modes of action out at the same time. So we have such a high spray rate in soybeans of Enlist herbicide. I think with the ability to come right in corn, and you'll have the ability to come in and use make it an additive approach. In other words, if you're having a hard time controlling water hemp or something later, binds later in your corn, this is an additive approach that you can come in later and not necessarily replace what you're doing, but get better control with a new mode of action in corn. Okay. I'm going to ask Brett to comment on this weed resistance. He looked at this study. I'm going to ask him to make some comments.
Yeah, so just a little more info around, having Enlist corn, will it create weed resistance? This was a study that was done and paints a pretty good picture. And I'll try to do my best to explain all these different lines and everything you see here. If you look at the bottom of the slide, we have 4 different colored bars. The light green bar was a herbicide system that was a diversified glyphosate herbicide system. So what that means is they use glyphosate along with many other modes of action. The dark blue bar you see there is going to be a diversified 2,4-D system. So again, just like the glyphosate one, they're using 2,4-D along with other modes of action. The light blue bar represents 2,4-D reliance. So they're using 2,4-D exclusively and not mixing other modes of action. And then finally, the dark green bar is fully diversified. So they're using glyphosate, 2,4-D, and other modes of action in these scenarios. And basically, what you're going to see here is over time, our weed species are going to increase if we're relying on 2,4-D. And over time, our weed density is going to increase if we're just relying on 2,4-D only. The key to this, and I think Andy mentioned it earlier, just relying solely on glyphosate, Roundup back in the day, got us in a mess of trouble. We used one tool, didn't mix it with other tools, and it led to resistance over time. So, in these scenarios, we want to make sure we're using multiple modes of action.
Okay. Doesn't Corteva promote or support spraying Enlist one herbicide alone? So just exactly what we talked about. Okay, it's not that it won't necessarily work. However, if you use only one mode of action, this chart here on the right shows you single modes of action and how quickly they have become a number of species have become weed species have become resistant to it. Okay, and so you can make anything pose some resistance if you work hard enough at it. Okay, it doesn't matter. Now, some things happen quicker than others. 2,4-D historically has a novel mode of action. So the resistance has been very slowly, if at all. And then there is some documented resistance in spots, okay, due to abnormal applications and that type of thing. But for the most part, if you will go with multiple modes of action, including your pre and post, and always include, at least at the minimum, glyphosate with Enlist application, you're going to find out, even on glyphosate resistant weeds, we're getting some good out of that glyphosate. And certainly when you look at trait and herbicide longevity, we never recommend spraying Enlist alone. And always with approved tank mixture, whether it's glyphosate, Liberty, clethodim is one in the upper Midwest. It's is real prevalent that people have had luck with. And so as you move forward, never put out Enlist one by itself, and that's not what we recommend. Next slide. What is the best management practice for Liberty with Enlist one herbicide? And so we have a lot of Liberty that's sprayed with Enlist one. And I'm going to say Liberty and or glufosinate products. And so it's the best when you get into things like amaranth species, pigweeds, water hemp, those kochia, glyphosate resistance, it tends to really work better than just a straight glyphosate. Now, especially if the weeds have a little bit of size to them, okay? And so we always want to go with a full rate, a quart of each, okay? And I think Liberty actually has some rate ranges that might exceed that over at least a season basis. The weed height, 3 inches or less, that's optimum. I think our label says up to 6. But the combination of the two, what's nice about it is the combination of the two between Liberty and Enlist one is that you're using a growth product, a hormone product, Enlist one. And so it translocates readily in the plant. And you're using a combination with a contact product, which is Liberty, which counts on the contact, but those two mixed together are about 10 to 12% better than either one used individually. And so those two actually work better. There's some I hate to say synergy, but there's some additive effects by the two being mixed together because of their mode, the way they work. And Liberty works a lot better with Enlist one added to it. And so the people that are straight Liberty know, you saw those growing points on those weeds. If you miss one of those growing points and you don't have Enlist with it to carry it to that other growing point systemically, you blow the top out of them and they just come out around the outside. So Liberty by itself is a good herbicide, but only about 85% at the best. And with Enlist, it's you can optimize the control. We always like to put on at least 20 gallon per acre. The right nozzles we'll get into quicker, and then there's a little bit of limitations with sun and humidity on the Liberty side, but with Enlist you can open that window just a little wider. Next slide. Will Enlist weed control system control kochia? Some of you on the western front here know that kochia is a big problem in some of these areas out in the plains, and we've demonstrated that Enlist Liberty combination can be a good post-emergent product to help manage kochia following some of the key products it used in a pre. fall application of Valor, Sonic, Metribution, Sharpen, some of those products work really well. And if you can get a fall program on and not get that huge flush initially, then you can come back in and do some pretty terrific weed control post application with an Enlist Liberty combination and make it work fairly effectively on kochia. And we did a lot of this work in Nebraska that demonstrated that. Next slide. Why do Enlist E3 soybeans show cupping? Next slide. You know that, so they don't, unless they're hit with dicamba from any one of 2 or 3 different ways. So we don't have cupping on our E3 beans. It's no different than any other bean. The problem is there are so many off-target movement opportunities or equipment contamination opportunities, and it takes such little material on dicamba to cup a soybean. Now, a lot of you probably may have had some experience cup beans here on the phone. If they're done early and you get a neighbor with corn that's moved, dicamba's moved out of it, or something comes across it early, it's usually not a problem, and they come out of it and they're just fine. The things that the problem with the cupped beans is if it happens during the reproductive cycle and it's a pretty strong movement, then you can get some problems with some of those beans yield wise. But with more beans Enlist all the time, we've moved past some of this cupping issue. And because if it's Enlist beans next to you and across the road, you're not going to have that problem. And so that's the reason a lot of people have gone to some of this system, is simply because the herbicide stays put. It works. You know, let's just say the herbicides are equal dicamba, and they're probably very similar in control. But the fact of it is, it stays where you put it, and it's a lot more neighbor friendly to use from the standpoint of off-target movement. Okay. This is kind of an adoption platform in the U.S. You can see that in the upper Midwest, it's really strong adoption for Enlist. We appreciate everybody's support on the phone because it's a good trait system. Let's keep it intact and let's keep it safe. You know, that's the thing of it is, don't abuse it. Try to get to where you use multiple modes of action and don't rely on Enlist for everything. And but the forecast is to be greater than they're close to 2/3 of the market in the next few years. Next slide. So we're going to kind of finish up talking about dicamba nozzles and TTI nozzles. Can I use my dicamba nozzles? We talked about this. If you had nozzles that Monsanto provided you back in the day for XtendiMax, so trade them in. Okay, those ultra coarse nozzles, you can make them work, but you have to really work pretty hard at making them work. Especially if you're using something like a Liberty or something that needs uniformity of spray coverage or smaller droplets. Get away from those ultra coarse nozzles. Next slide, and we can look at the chart here. I prefer to go to the bottom end of a course and not use this ultra coarse TTI nozzle. AIXR is a really good nozzle. There's a ton of really good nozzles out there right now. It doesn't matter the brand name, but there's a lot of really good nozzles that are appropriate to use not only for Enlist, but also think about your tank mix partner. Glyphosate works better, is the better coverage you get. So does Liberty. So next slide. And if you can look at this chart, 12 to 16, these are off-label height applications, but what we're trying to demonstrate is the TTI nozzle with straight Liberty on the left, 20 gallon per acre. The middle slide is an AIXR nozzle, same herbicide rate, Liberty and a quart. You can see the coverage is better. And then you add Enlist 1, okay, at a quart with Liberty, and you can see that the herbicide additive, that 10 or 12% is a real deal when it talks about adding Enlist and Liberty together. They work better. And also the AIXR nozzle is better coverage, period, than the TTI. Next slide. What nozzle should I use with these systems? Go ahead to the next one here. Let's hit the next slide there. And there's, you know, these pulse width modulation systems are real popular, especially farmer applicators or even custom app. There's a large number of nozzles now that are approved. And so used to be John Deere would come out with a specific nozzle from a manufacturer, but now I think you can even request a specific nozzle that you want in your machine. We found out that, you know, there's a lot of good nozzles. Wilgers, and if you had to pick one, or a real good option to use on these pulse width systems that are really good. And we've had a lot of good luck with this 11006. The problem is a lot of people don't like to run their systems at high enough pressure. And so we're encouraging to go to at least a 50, 55 PSI. It doesn't matter if it's a pulse width or a standard spray. We want you up in that upper part of the pressure range just because of the coverage and the penetration through the canopy. Next slide. So as we go into the summary here, we've got a couple minutes over. I apologize. But the literature we have here, please go to enlist.com. We have a product use guide there, and all the approved tank mix options are on there. Application guide and additional literature pieces. Certainly check with your local Corteva folks there, and anything that you're wanting, we can get you plenty of them. So I think the Enlist Ahead management is a piece of it from the standpoint of training and education. And we're going to put a stewardship branch on that, okay? An enforcement branch on the Enlist Ahead piece. And so that will be coming here in the next few weeks, and you'll see that. Let's go answer some of the questions here, Brett, and see what we have.
Is K-salt glyphosate required? Sorry if already covered.
Is K-salt glyphosate required? No, it's not necessarily required or prohibited. Any glyphosate works. I think it might work better. You know, a lot of the Bayer products are K-salt based, and they work just fine. Now, the mixing is a little bit different. In other words, we don't want you dumping in a K-salt and Enlist at the same time, right, into a small amount of water. The biggest thing we have on mixing is not necessarily what the salt is on the glyphosate, it's how much water's in your tank. And so if you'll start off with if you have a 1,000-gallon tank and you've got 500 gallons of water in there, that's very forgiving on what you mix. The biggest problem we have is when you use a K-salt glyphosate with, it doesn't matter if it's Enlist or other products, they try to dissolve into each other in the absence of sufficient water. And so it's not required or prohibited. You can use any form of glyphosate. And what does mixing order matter with the Enlist Liberty tank mix? What's your thought on that, Brett? Do you guys typically have more oils or less, or what? How do you do how do you like that mixed? One thing that we look at is in the mixing order is traditionally we have a mixing order that starts out with like your buffering agents or your AMSs. Okay. And I like to get everything mixed in there, including Liberty, prior to putting in the Enlist. Okay. So I prefer to put the Liberty in there. The Liberty itself has a huge surfactant load in it. And so I like to get that mixed early in the process, right after your AMSs and right during your ECs, when you should mix your ECs, right after all your dry flowable stuff. And that's my opinion. I like to mix the Liberty first, and then finish off with the Enlist, and then and your oils afterwards. Let me see here. Is a drift reduction agent required or already in the formulation? So a drift reduction agent is not required. So a lot of people use a combination product that has drift control in it, but it has to be approved. The Colex-D technology that we have already in the container is it has drift control ability. Okay, so it's already in the formulation. Now, there are some approved drift control agents that are in combination of products, either with MSOs or COCs or silicones, that are approved, and they don't hurt anything. Now, if it has the ability to help the uptake, like if it has an MSO in it, that would help, right? And the drift control agent just can't negatively impact the application. And so that's how that would be my thought on that. You want to make any comments, Brett? I'm not hearing you. You need to unmute. Okay. I guess we've got some technical issues here. I appreciate your attendance today, and thanks for continuing to ask questions. If there's any additional ones, we can hang around and answer a few afterwards, or if we'd like to wrap it up. Thanks for looking at it. Let me a couple more come in here. Brett, I think you're going to have to unmute because I can't hear you. Is using Liberty and Enlist one together, whose nozzles request do we follow? So that's a really good question. I would pick a nozzle that's on both products. And I have a lot of people that use air inducted twin turbo jets, okay, for Liberty and Enlist. I'm not saying that's an absolutely best nozzle, because an AIXR works equally as well. What you want to do is not have too many lines, and that air inducted twin turbo is on both products, and it works really well. It's the one that has the dual nozzle setup. That's the one I would personally use. And then another question here is, compatibility agent needed? I would say if you get into any more than about 4 products together, I would start looking at a possible compatibility agent, especially if you're putting in some clethodim products, like for volunteer corn over beans with Liberty and that type of thing. And so that may be the only example I've I've run into where we get some tank mixing issues, where you've got, especially if you're not mixing with sufficient water. The biggest problem we have is people try to mix everything in about 20% of the water that they need for the job. And so if they'll start off with 50% of the water in the tank, all this mixing issue goes away because there's enough water to dissolve the product that you're putting in it. But a compatibility agent, really, when you start throwing things like fungicides and insecticides, which are approved, and clethodim and 5, 6, 7 products, that maybe I'd do a jar test and maybe test that out before I put it in my tank. But in those cases, it might be beneficial. Yes. We good? Are you back on, Brett? I don't think so. Well, listen, thanks for the questions, folks, and I will be glad to. We got one more here. Is there CCA credits available for this meeting? I'm going to say I'll have to double check on that. Send me your email address, and I will have I'll get back to you on that. If you just include it on this chat, we'll get back to you and see if there's an option to do that. Usually you have to go through your local extension to get credit for that. And depending on which state you're in is depending on what rules. So appreciate the help, guys. Thanks for all your business, and thanks for your attendance. I'm going to sign off. Thank you.